Have you ever told a lie for a good reason? A lie meant to protect someone you love? This is the story of Julian, a man who built an empire of glass and steel, but couldn't protect his own heart, and Chloe, a woman with nothing to her name but a sketchbook and a spirit that refused to break. They made a deal, a simple performance to bring a dying man some peace, but in the world of the ultra-rich, nothing is simple, and some performances become dangerously real. Get ready for a story where every glance is a line in the script, and every touch could shatter the entire illusion. Julian Vance was a ghost in his own life. By 35, he had forged a logistics empire from sheer will, a titan of Manhattan who moved priceless art and fragile antiquities across the globe. His office, a minimalist sky perch overlooking Central Park, was his fortress. His sprawling Connecticut estate was his gilded cage. He was a product of a small, hard-working town in Maine, a place of pine forests and calloused hands. But he had long since shed that skin. A brutal betrayal in his college years by a woman who chose wealth over him had been the catalyst. It taught him that love was a transaction, and he had decided to stop trading. He built walls of wealth so high, no one could ever reach him again. Then, on a rain-slicked highway, he found Chloe Miller. She was an artist whose dreams had dissolved in the city's unforgiving rain. Fleeing a toxic home life after her mother remarried, Chloe had come to New York to paint. Instead, she found herself invisible, a spectre haunting the edges of a city that glittered with promises it never kept. With only a stray dog for a friend and a tattered portfolio of charcoal sketches, she was one wrong move away from disappearing completely. The hiss of tyres on wet asphalt was the only sound as Julian's Mercedes cut through the oppressive darkness of the I-87. He was driving, escaping the city, escaping a phone call that had left his hands shaking on the leather-wrapped wheel. His mother's voice, tight with the grief she was trying to hide. The doctors gave him 6 months, Julian. Maybe less. The words echoed, a drumbeat of dread. He needed air. A break from the suffocating reality. He pulled into a desolate 24-hour rest stop. Its fluorescent lights a sickly beacon in the gloom. The air smelled of diesel fumes and damp earth. A small fire sputtered in a rusty drum barrel, casting flickering shadows on a group of rough-looking men. Their laughter was harsh, predatory. And then he saw her, a young woman cornered against the grimy wall of the convenience store, her thin frame trembling. She clutched a scruffy dog, its tail tucked between its legs. "Leave her alone!" Her voice was a fragile thread against their jeering chorus. Julian's exhaustion vanished, replaced by a cold, familiar anger. The kind of anger that had built his empire. One of the men, broad and menacing, stepped forward, a cruel smirk on his face. "Look what we got here. Little Red Riding Hood. All lost in the woods." He reached for the dog's leash. "Let go of the mutt. We're hungry." Julian moved before he could think. He wasn't the brawler he'd been in his youth, but the muscle memory was there. He slammed the car door, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the night. "I believe the lady said to leave her alone." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The men turned, their smirks faltering as they took in the expensive suit, the cold confidence in his eyes, the sheer presence of a man who was used to the world bending to his will. The leader grunted, sizing him up. "This ain't your business, pal." Julian took a step closer, the dim light glinting off his designer watch. "You're making it my business." For a moment, tension hung thick in the air. Then, with a muttered curse, the leader waved his friends off. They shuffled away, their bravado evaporating into the misty night. The girl, Chloe, stood frozen, her knuckles white as she clung to her dog. Her wide, terrified eyes met his. He approached her slowly as if she were a startled deer. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now. She just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He could see the exhaustion etched on her face, the dark smudges under her eyes, the worn-out state of her clothes. She wasn't just in trouble, she was living in it. "Where are you headed, Ak?" he asked, though he suspected the answer was nowhere. She finally found her voice, a hoarse whisper. I don't know. The honesty in those 3 words was more devastating than any elaborate story. He looked at her, then at the scruffy dog, who let out a tentative whimper. The world he lived in was one of calculated risks and strategic plans. This was neither. This was pure, unadulterated impulse. "Get in the car," he said, the words leaving his mouth before he could second-guess them. "I'll take you somewhere safe." She hesitated, a flicker of fear and suspicion crossing her face. He understood. Why should she trust him? He was just another stranger in the night. "I'm not going to hurt you," he added, his tone even, "but you can't stay here." After a long, silent moment, she gave a single, decisive nod and followed him to the gleaming black car, a lost soul stepping into another world. The drive to his estate in Connecticut was silent. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, a small, still figure dwarfed by the plush, leather interior. Her dog, whom she called Patches, was curled up on the floor mat at her feet, already asleep. The city lights gave way to the dark, winding roads of the suburbs, lined with monolithic houses hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. When they finally pulled through his own gate and up the long, gravel driveway, her eyes widened. The house wasn't a house. It was a statement. A modern masterpiece of glass, stone and cedar. It seemed to float among the ancient trees, its warm interior lights glowing against the night. "You live here," she breathed, the question filled with awe. "I stay here," he corrected, unlocking the front door. The inside was cavernous and impeccably decorated, yet it felt sterile, unlived in. The air was still, carrying only the faint scent of wood polish and solitude. It was more a museum than a home. He led her to a guest wing that was larger than any apartment she'd ever seen. "You can stay here for the night," he said, his voice echoing in the grand space. "We'll figure things out in the morning." The next morning, Chloe woke up in a bed that felt like a cloud, the morning sun streaming through a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked a serene forest. For a moment she thought it was all a dream, a strange fantasy born of hunger and fear. But the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the quiet hum of the house told her it was real. She found Julian in the kitchen, a vast expanse of stainless steel and white marble. He was dressed in casual clothes, but he still radiated an aura of intense focus. He motioned for her to sit at the massive island. "I have a proposition for you," he said, getting straight to the point. "This is a big house. It's empty most of the time. I need someone to look after it. A housekeeper, a caretaker. The guest house on the property is fully furnished. It would be yours to live in. I'll pay you a generous salary." Chloe stared at him, bewildered. She had been expecting him to drive her to a shelter, not offer her a job and a home. "Why?" she asked, her voice small. "Why me? You don't know anything about me." He looked at her, his gaze unreadable. "I know you were in trouble, and you didn't run. You stood your ground for that dog. That's enough for me." Chloe moved into the guest house that afternoon. It was a charming, self-contained cottage, nestled in the trees at the edge of the property, a world away from the cold grandeur of the main house. It was clean, cosy, and safe. Patches immediately claimed a spot on the rug by the fireplace. For the first few days, Chloe felt like an intruder, a ghost haunting someone else's perfect life. She cleaned the main house with meticulous care, wiping away invisible dust from priceless sculptures and polishing floors that already gleamed. She rarely saw Julian. He left before sunrise and returned long after dark, a fleeting shadow in his own home. But she saw the evidence of his life, the half-empty glasses of whiskey, the stacks of financial reports on his desk, the profound, echoing loneliness of the space. She started cooking, leaving simple, hearty meals for him in the oven. She didn't know if he ate them, but the act of cooking made the sterile kitchen feel more like a home. In the quiet evenings, she would sit in her cottage and draw, filling her sketchbook with the towering trees, the sleek lines of the house, and the face of the mysterious, sad-eyed man who had saved her. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. A quiet routine settled over the estate. Chloe found a rhythm in her new life. The work was simple and the solitude gave her time to heal and to create. She filled sketchbook after sketchbook, her charcoal and pencils capturing the light and shadows of her new world. Julian remained a distant figure, but the space between them slowly began to shrink. He started leaving her notes. "Thank you for dinner. The stew was excellent." Or, "The grocery list is on the counter." Small, impersonal communications that still felt like a connection. One evening, he came home early and found her in the main library, sketching the way the sunset illuminated the rows of books. He didn't speak, just stood in the doorway and watched her. She was so absorbed in her work, her brow furrowed in concentration. For the first time, he saw her not as a problem he had solved, but as a person, an artist, with a quiet intensity that intrigued him. He saw a flicker of the life his own had been missing for so long, a spark of genuine passion that no amount of money could buy. The illusion of peace was shattered by another phone call. This time his father was on the other end, his voice weaker, but with a stubborn resolve. "We're coming to the city, son. The doctors here sent my file to a specialist at Mount Sinai. Your mother booked the tickets. We'll be there next week." Julian's blood ran cold. His parents, here, in his world, they had never approved of his solitary life. "When you gonna settle down?" his father would ask every time they spoke. A man needs a family, not just a balance sheet. The pressure had been a constant low-grade hum, but now, with the clock ticking, it had become a roar. He couldn't bear the thought of them seeing his vast, empty house, his vast, empty life. He couldn't let his father spend his final months worrying that his only son was destined to be alone and unhappy. A desperate, insane idea began to form in his mind. It was reckless. It was manipulative. It was probably a terrible mistake, but it was the only thing he could think of. He needed a buffer, a story, an illusion of happiness. He needed Chloe. That night he knocked on the door of her cottage. She opened it, surprised to see him. He looked haggard, a deep-seated anxiety in his eyes she had never seen before. "Can I come in?" he asked. He sat on the small sofa, turning a pen over and over in his hands. "My parents are coming to visit," he began, his voice strained. "My father. He's sick, very sick. They think it's his heart." Chloe's heart went out to him. "I'm so sorry, Julian." He looked up, his gaze intense. "There's something they've always wanted for me, a family. They worry that I'm alone. The stress is not good for my father's condition. I can't let him spend what time he has left worrying about me." He took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I need you to do something for me. It's a lot to ask. It's crazy, but I'll pay you whatever you want. I need you to pretend to be my fiancée." The air in the small cottage suddenly felt thin, unbreathable. Chloe stared at him, convinced she had misheard. You're what?" "My fiancé," he repeated, his voice low and urgent. "Just for the week they are here, just to give them some peace." Chloe's mind reeled. It was the plot of a ridiculous movie. A rich, powerful man asking the hired help to be his fake fiancé. Her first instinct was to say no. It was deceptive. It was wrong. And it was dangerous. What if his parents found out? The humiliation would be unbearable for them. And for her. "Julian, I can't," she said, shaking her head. I'm not an actress. I can't lie to your parents, especially when your father is so ill." "You wouldn't be lying about everything," he argued, a desperate edge to his voice. "You're kind. You're smart. You're everything they would ever want for me. All you have to do is be yourself, and let them believe we're in love." He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "Chloe, please, I've never asked anyone for anything like this. I wouldn't if it wasn't important. He just wants to see me happy. This one little lie could give him that." She looked at the man before her, the billionaire titan stripped of his power, looking utterly lost and vulnerable. He had saved her. He had given her a home and a chance to start over. How could she say no? With a heavy heart she whispered, "Okay, I'll do it." The next few days were a blur of frantic preparation. Julian coached her on the details of their relationship, how they met, at a gallery opening, how long they'd been together, almost a year, and inside jokes they supposedly shared. It was awkward and stilted. To make the story believable, she had to move into the main house. Her belongings felt pathetically few in the massive guest suite she was given. Julian took her on a shopping spree on Fifth Avenue, a surreal experience where salespeople fawned over her. She felt like an imposter in the elegant, expensive clothes he bought her. He even bought her a ring, a stunning yet understated sapphire engagement ring. As he slipped it onto her finger to see if it fit, their hands touched. A jolt of unexpected electricity passed between them. They both pulled back quickly, their eyes meeting for a split second in shared surprise and confusion. The line between reality and the charade was already starting to blur, and his parents hadn't even arrived yet. They spent hours talking, not as employer and employee, but as two people trying to build a believable fiction. He told her about his childhood in Maine, about his father teaching him to fish, about his mother's incredible apple pies. He showed her photos, and for the first time she saw the boy behind the billionaire. In turn, she told him about her own dreams of being an artist, about the passion that drove her. He listened, truly listened, with an attentiveness that was both unnerving and deeply flattering. He even asked to see her sketchbooks. She was hesitant, her art was so personal, but she showed him. He flipped through the pages in silence, his expression unreadable. He paused on a portrait she had done of him from memory. It wasn't the powerful CEO, but the lonely man she saw in the quiet moments. "You see me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You actually see me." In that moment, Chloe realized with a pang of fear that the hardest part of this lie wouldn't be deceiving his parents, but deceiving herself. The day of his parents' arrival, the house was filled with a nervous energy. Chloe had arranged flowers, and the scent of a home-cooked meal, a pot roast from his mother's recipe, filled the air. She was wearing a simple, elegant blue dress Julian had picked out, the sapphire on her finger feeling impossibly heavy. When the black car pulled up the driveway, her heart pounded against her ribs. Julian stood beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back. His touch was meant to be reassuring, part of the act, but it sent a shiver down her spine. An older couple stepped out of the car. Michael Vance was a tall man, leaner than in the photos, with a kind, weathered face and his son's intense eyes. Sarah Vance was a small, bustling woman with a warm, infectious smile. They walked towards the house, their eyes fixed on Julian. Then their gaze shifted to Chloe, and Sarah's smile widened. "So," she said, her eyes twinkling. "You must be Chloe. It is so wonderful to finally meet the woman who stole our son's heart." Chloe's fear melted away under the warmth of their welcome. Sarah hugged her like she was a long-lost daughter. Michael shook her hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "Julian told us you were an artist," he said, his voice raspy but kind. "It's good he's finally found someone with some soul." Over dinner, they were easy to talk to. They weren't intimidated by the grand house. They filled it with laughter and stories about Julian's childhood, embarrassing him with tales of his teenage awkwardness. Chloe found herself laughing along, genuinely enjoying their company. She saw where Julian got his quiet strength from his father, and his hidden warmth from his mother. They were good, decent people, and the guilt of her deception twisted in her stomach. Julian played his part perfectly, looking at her with an affection that felt startlingly real, his hand often finding hers across the table. She could see the profound relief and happiness in his parents' eyes. The lie was working, and that was the most heartbreaking part of it all. The next few days were a strange domestic fantasy. Chloe and Julian fell into a surprisingly natural rhythm of playing the happy couple. They took his parents on a tour of the city, visiting museums and parks. During a visit to the Met, Michael, a retired carpenter, spent more time admiring the intricate woodwork of the period rooms than the famous paintings. He and Chloe struck up a conversation about craftsmanship and art, and she felt a genuine bond with him. Sarah, meanwhile, took Chloe under her wing, sharing recipes and asking about her family. Chloe had to invent a vague, sanitized version of her past, the lies leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. One evening, Sarah found Chloe in the kitchen, staring out the window. "You make him happy, you know," she said softly. "I haven't seen this light in his eyes since. For a very long time. He's a good man, but he builds his walls too high. Thank you for finding your way over them." Chloe could only nod, her throat tight with unshed tears. Julian watched Chloe with his parents, a sense of wonder growing inside him. She was a natural. She was warm, engaging, and patient. She listened to his father's stories with genuine interest and laughed at his mother's jokes. She didn't just play the part of a loving fiancée. She embodied the very essence of a partner, someone who fits seamlessly into the fabric of his family. He realized he was seeing a side of her he hadn't allowed himself to notice before. He also saw a side of himself he thought was long gone. With her, with his parents, the tension in his shoulders eased. He smiled more. He felt lighter. One afternoon, while his parents were resting, he found her sketching by the lake on his property. He sat beside her, and for a long time, they just watched the water in comfortable silence. "You're really good at this," he said finally. "At what? Sketching?" she asked. "No," he replied, his voice soft. "At being you." The line was no longer blurry. It had completely disappeared. He wasn't acting anymore. The illusion was perfect, but Julian knew it was fragile. He decided to take his parents and Chloe to dinner at one of his favourite restaurants in the city, a quiet, elegant place known for its privacy. He wanted to give them a perfect night, a memory to hold on to. The evening started beautifully. His father, despite his fatigue, was in high spirits telling old family stories. His mother was beaming. Chloe looked stunning in a dark green dress, her laughter filling their small private dining room. Julian felt a profound sense of peace, a dangerous contentment. It was a perfect picture of the life he never thought he wanted, but now, desperately wished, was real. And then, the picture shattered. A voice, smooth as silk and sharp as glass, cut through their conversation. "Julian, darling, I thought that was you." He turned, and his heart dropped. Standing there was Isabel Croft, the woman who had broken his heart all those years ago. She was as beautiful and polished as ever, her eyes scanning their table with a predatory curiosity. Isabel's gaze landed on Chloe, then on the ring on her finger. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. "Well, well, you didn't tell me you were engaged," she purred, ignoring everyone else at the table. "And to whom do I owe the pleasure?" Julian made the introductions through gritted teeth. Isabel's smile never wavered. "Chloe, what a lovely name! And what is it that you do?" Chloe, flustered, answered softly, "I'm an artist." Isabel raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "An artist? How charming." Julian always did have a soft spot for charity cases. The insult hung in the air, a poisonous dart, aimed directly at Chloe. Julian was about to lash out to tell Isabel exactly what he thought of her, but his mother spoke first. Sarah Vance, who had been watching the exchange with sharp, intelligent eyes, placed her hand on Chloe's arm. Her voice, when she spoke, was as calm and unyielding as the Maine coastline. "My son has a soft spot for genuine, talented and kind-hearted women," she said, her gaze locking with Isabel's. "Things you wouldn't know anything about." Isabel was taken aback, her composure cracking for a fraction of a second. She tried to recover with a condescending laugh. "Oh, I see. He's found himself a little project. How sweet. I seem to remember you had a housekeeper who lived in the guest cottage. Is that where you two met?" The implication was clear and ugly. Chloe's face went pale. The entire charade was about to collapse. The lie was one thing, but this public humiliation was another. Julian's father, Michael, started to look unwell, his face ashen. Julian felt a surge of white-hot rage. But once again, Sarah intervened. She stood up, a small woman who suddenly seemed to command the entire room. "Yes, Chloe has been staying at the estate, and in the short time we've known her, She has brought more warmth and light into that house than you brought in the entire 2 years you knew my son," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we are having a family dinner. I suggest you find another table to poison with your presence." Isabel, for the first time in her life, was rendered speechless. She stared at Sarah for a moment, then turned on her heel and swept away. Silence descended on their table. Chloe was trembling, unable to look at anyone. Julian reached for her hand, his heart aching for her. His father was breathing heavily, and Julian's first thought was for his health. "Dad, are you okay?" Michael nodded slowly, a small, proud smile touching his lips. He looked at his wife with pure admiration. "Sarah," he said, his voice full of emotion, "you were magnificent." Sarah simply patted Chloe's hand. "No one messes with my family," she said fiercely. The rest of the dinner was a quiet affair. The mood was broken, the perfect illusion shattered. On the drive home, Chloe stared out the window, silent. Julian knew he had to say something, to apologise for what she had been put through. He had asked her to lie for him, and it had resulted in her being viciously attacked. When they got back to the estate and his parents had retired for the night, he found her standing on the terrace, hugging herself against the night chill. "Chloe, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice raw. "I never should have put you in that position." She turned to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's not your fault, Julian. She was right about one thing, though. I am your housekeeper. This is all a lie." He took a step closer to her, the space between them crackling with unspoken emotions. "No," he said, his voice firm. "She was wrong about everything that matters." He reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that escaped her eye. "This started as a lie, a stupid, desperate plan. But it's not a lie anymore. Not for me." His heart was pounding, the confession hanging in the air. "I've been hiding in this house, in my life for 10 years, hiding from everything. And then you came along, you with your sketchbook, and your stray dog, and your quiet strength. You filled this empty house with life. You filled me with life." Chloe's breath hitched. She stared up at him, her eyes wide and searching. "Julian." "I'm falling in love with you, Chloe," he whispered, the words feeling more real than anything he had ever said. "I know the timing is insane. I know this is all built on a deception. But my feelings aren't fake, and I have to believe, after tonight, that maybe yours aren't either." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but she didn't. She closed her eyes and met his lips in a kiss that was hesitant at first, then deep and full of all the words they hadn't been able to say. The next morning, his parents' last day, the air in the house was thick with unspoken truths. Chloe and Julian moved around each other with a new, tender awareness. They knew they had to tell his parents everything. The lie had served its purpose, but it couldn't be the foundation for whatever was now growing between them. After breakfast, Julian asked his parents to join them in the living room. Michael and Sarah sat on the sofa, their faces etched with a quiet knowing. Julian took a deep breath, holding Chloe's hand tightly. "Mom, Dad, there's something we have to tell you." He confessed everything. How he had met Chloe, how he had hired her as a housekeeper, and the desperate bargain he had made with her to pretend to be his fiancée. He didn't make excuses. He laid the truth bare, taking full responsibility for the deception. When he finished, the room was silent. Chloe braced herself for their anger, their disappointment. She wouldn't blame them. They had been lied to in the most intimate way. She looked at Sarah, expecting to see coldness in her eyes. Instead, she saw a profound, gentle sadness. Sarah sighed, a long, weary sound. She reached out and took her husband's hand. "Julian," she said softly, "we know. Well, we suspected." Julian stared at her, stunned. "What? You think a mother doesn't know her own son?" she said, a faint smile on her lips. "I knew something wasn't quite right from the start. You were trying too hard. But then, I saw the way you looked at her, and the way she looked at you. that part wasn't an act. And Michael and I, we decided it didn't matter how you found each other. Michael spoke then, his voice stronger than it had been in days. We saw you were happy, son, genuinely happy. We saw this wonderful young woman who brought the light back into your eyes. Did we care about the details? No. All we've ever wanted was for you to find a love like your mother and I have. It looked like you had. The rest was just noise. Chloe felt tears welling in her eyes, but this time they were tears of overwhelming relief and gratitude. Julian was speechless. His elaborate, stressful deception had been unnecessary. His parents had seen past the lie to the one thing that was true. He looked at Chloe, his heart full. He had put her through so much, and yet, here she was, by his side. The lie might have brought her here, Sarah continued, her eyes on Chloe, but the love is what will make her stay, if you're smart enough to ask her, that is. Julian turned to Chloe, his expression serious. He dropped to one knee, right there in front of his parents. The move was impulsive, not planned, but it felt utterly right. Chloe Miller, he began, his voice thick with emotion. This all started backwards. We built a fake life together before we even knew each other. But I've gotten to know you. You are the most incredible, resilient and compassionate person I have ever met. You taught me how to feel again. He took the sapphire ring off her finger. I gave you this as a prop. Now I want to give it back to you as a promise that I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of your love. Will you marry me, for real this time? Through her tears, Chloe laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course I will. Julian slid the ring back onto her finger, and this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like it belonged there. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply, as his parents applauded, their faces radiant with happiness. The lie was over. The truth was just beginning. In that moment, the grand, empty house finally felt like a home, filled not with expensive objects, but with the one thing he had always lacked, an authentic, unconditional love. He realized his father had been right all along. A man doesn't need a balance sheet. He needs a family, and he had just found his. The weight that had been on his shoulders for a decade finally lifted, replaced by a profound and hopeful lightness. A few months later, the autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold across the Connecticut landscape. Julian and Chloe stood on the terrace watching the sunset. His father's surgery had been a success. The doctors were optimistic. Julian was convinced that the hope and happiness of that week had given his father the strength he needed to fight. Chloe's first art show was scheduled for the spring, sponsored by a gallery Julian had introduced her to. Her sketches of him, the lonely billionaire, were not in the show. Those were for her alone. They were planning a small wedding for the following summer, in the backyard of his parents' home in Maine, surrounded by pine trees and family. Patches, the scruffy stray, now had a custom-made bed in front of the massive fireplace and was living the life of a king. Chloe leaned her head on Julian's shoulder, a comfortable silence between them. She thought about the strange, improbable journey that had led her to this moment, from a desolate rest stop to this beautiful home, to this incredible love. Julian wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. She smiled. "I was just thinking about that first night. How scared I was. How I almost didn't get in your car." "I'm glad you did," he said, his voice filled with a gratitude that still humbled him. "You saved me, Chloe, in every way that a person can be saved." She turned to face him, her eyes shining. "We saved each other," she corrected gently. The world he had built was one of contracts and negotiations, of profits and losses, but the deal he had made with her, the most reckless and unprofessional transaction of his life, had yielded the greatest return imaginable. It had given him back his own heart. As the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, he knew with absolute certainty that his life hadn't truly begun until the day he met the homeless artist in the rain. She had sketched a new future for him, one filled with colour, light, and a love that was more real than anything money could ever buy. They stood there for a long time, not needing words. The quiet hum of the crickets replaced the frantic energy of the city. For Julian, this quiet was no longer a symbol of loneliness, but of peace. He looked at Chloe, her face illuminated by the soft light from the house, and he saw his entire future. He saw laughter in the sterile kitchen. He saw small, muddy footprints on the polished floors. He saw a life, a real life, finally taking root in the house that had been just a structure for so long. He remembered the cold-driven man he was just a few months ago, a man who believed love was a weakness to be avoided at all costs. It felt like a lifetime ago. This woman, who had nothing, had shown him what true wealth was. It wasn't in the bank accounts or the stock portfolios. It was in the warmth of a hand held in yours, in the comfort of a shared silence, and in the courage to be vulnerable. Chloe traced the lines on his hand, a hand that had signed million-dollar deals, and one rainy night had reached out to a stranger in need. Her life had been a series of sketches, fleeting moments captured in charcoal, always in shades of grey, but with Julian, her world was exploding with colour. He had not only given her a safe harbour, but had also become her greatest champion, believing in her art and in her with a fierce conviction that made her believe in herself. The lie they had constructed felt like a distant memory, a bizarre prologue to their real story. It was a story not of a billionaire and a housekeeper, but of two lonely souls who found each other in the dark and walked out into the light together. He had offered her a contract, but she had offered him a home, and it was a trade that had made them both infinitely richer. The future was unwritten, a blank canvas, but for the first time in a very long time, they were both eager to see what masterpiece they would create together. As night fell completely, a chill entered the air. "Come on," Julian said, leading her back inside. "Let's go home." The word home rolled off his tongue with an ease and a truth it had never possessed before. Inside, Patches lifted his head from his plush bed and thumped his tail in welcome. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, dancing glow across the room. Chloe looked at the portrait she had finally framed and hung over the mantelpiece, not of Julian the billionaire, but of Michael and Sarah Vance, a sketch she had done from memory after their visit. It captured their warmth, their strength, and the enduring love that had so fiercely protected their son. It was a reminder of where he came from, and a testament to the family she was now a part of. Julian came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood together, looking at the portrait. "They're going to be thrilled to have you as a daughter-in-law," he murmured into her hair. "And I," he said, turning her around to face him, "am going to be the luckiest man in the world to have you as my wife." In the end, the greatest truth was born from the most desperate lie. Julian, who had built an empire to shield his heart, discovered that real strength lies in vulnerability, and Chloe, who had lost everything, found that her greatest masterpiece was not a drawing, but the life she built with the man who saw the art within her soul. Their story began as a contract, a performance for an audience of two, but it became a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful realities are the ones we never, ever planned. Thank you for watching this journey unfold. If their story touched your heart, please show your support by giving this video a like, subscribing for more cinematic stories, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Do you believe a lie told for love can ever be truly forgiven? Let us know what you think.